Did you know that according to globalopportunityexplorer.org, within the next 30 years, it is estimated that over 90% of coral reefs will be under severe stress and at risk for bleaching? A bleached reef is essentially a dead reef. The zooxanthellae, which are microscopic algae which have a symbiotic relationship with corals, die out and leave the reef unable to sustain itself. And when the coral dies out, all the animals that were dependent on the coral reef for their livelihoods either die or migrate. Since 1980, the number of coral reefs afflicted by bleaching has gone from 8% to 31%, and the numbers keep rising each year. Bleaching is mostly caused by the increase in ocean temperature due to the destruction of the ozone layer by greenhouse gases. Just so you can get an idea of what bleached corals actually look like, I have a few right here. Now, generally, corals are nice, colorful colors, basically, but these are stark white. But fear not. There is a way to help revive reefs that have bleached due to climate change. There is a practice that is beginning to make headway in restoring reefs. It's called aquaculture, also commonly known as coral farming. Today we will be discussing what coral farming is, its history, and the effects it has already had on reefs that are replenished. And it is my hope that this speech will educate you and educate you into the dangers of coral bleaching and the benefits of coral farming, and that you will choose to be a part of the movement to restore our marine ecosystems. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what exactly is coral farming? I'm here to tell you that it is exactly what it sounds like. It's growing and harvesting coral, but instead of for human consumption, it's to restore ecosystems that are detrimental to our oceans and to our planet in general. I guess you could say it's farming with a twist. The Science Connected magazine explains the practice pretty well. All coral nurseries are underwater, for obvious reasons, and there are two types of nurseries, a cinder block and a pipe tree. Whichever type is being used, the method is the same. A small coral fragment is cut off of a healthy natural reef, which doesn't affect the mother reef, by the way, and attached to either the platform or the pipe tree. One pipe tree can hold dozens of corals. The corals are then left to grow, sometimes for years. Coral farming is, unfortunately, a long process. But once the corals are big enough, they are removed from the nursery and put into a dead or already dying reef. They are nailed to the ground so they don't get picked up by the current, and these healthy coral fragments are then able to reproduce and grow on their own, and in time the reef will be able to sustain life again. Coral farming seems simple, but with the projection of reef bleaching in the coming years, it is a most necessary practice. So now that we know what coral farming is, I will tell you about its history. Commercial coral farming had its beginnings in the late 60s and early 70s. Early coral farming, according to an academic paper on coral farming by J. Charles Delbeek, took place in aquariums. These aquariums would take coral from healthy reefs and put them in their exhibits to grow as homes for their animals. And the first official coral farming facility was actually in Michigan, and it was successfully able to grow and propagate many species of stony and soft corals in the 60s. As interest in corals rose and the number of healthy reefs declined throughout the decades, many other coral farming operations began around the world. But these were mostly for the trade and use of humans in home aquariums and for coral enthusiasts. Even today, many home coral farms are used by hobbyists, as Delbeek calls them, for trade and other human uses. The use of coral farming for restoring reefs only began recently, within the past 2 decades or so. But today there are numerous nurseries around the world dedicated to restoring ecosystems damaged by climate change. Coral farming is a fairly new practice, but it has already begun helping our reefs. So, the question is now, how has coral farming actually affected the reef ecosystems today? The coral farms mentioned in the Science Connected magazine farmed corals that had up to an 80% survival rate, which is obviously higher than the natural survival rate. These hardy corals will be put back onto a natural reef and end up reproducing to make more corals that have a higher survival rate. And farmed corals tend to have higher growth rates. According to concrete.online.uk, there are new aquaculture techniques that are increasing coral growth rates by up to 50%. Farmers no longer have to wait years to be able to restore a reef. It can take but months. New corals are growing faster and surviving better, and this benefits the dead and dying reefs because these new corals can quickly overtake and bring a reef back to life. And once a reef is restored, the animals, like fish and crustaceans and mollusks, which humans all eat, come back and thrive. According to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, their coral reef conservation program, known as CRCP, has invested in nurseries in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands that plan to replenish acres of reefs and around the islands with over 10,000 corals. With all the improvements made in the coral farming industry, we may see some reefs come back to life within our own lifetimes. Now, coral farming and restoring reefs isn't just to make the reefs look pretty. A majority of the ocean's food web lives on reefs, and a lot of the fish and seafood that you love to eat depends on reefs to sustain their populations. Coral reefs don't just benefit the oceans, they benefit humanity and our economies too. Commercial fishing is a global scale industry that makes up a large part of a lot of countries' economies. But if our reefs are destroyed, it throws everything out of whack. The fishing industry would collapse and millions could lose their job. I mean, coral farming isn't just about the gentrification of tourist hotspots. It's about rebuilding our oceans, which take up to over 97% of our entire planet. Coral farming has numerous positive effects, most of which I don't even have time to list. And aquaculture is just one of the numerous practices scientists are undertaking to help our oceans and heal our world. The threat of climate change is increasing every year. The ice caps are melting, ocean levels are rising, and ecosystems are disappearing both in the oceans and on land. We as the dominant species on this planet have a responsibility to care for and fix the world that we have broken. And the practice of coral farming is just the beginning. Thank you.